Welcome to the Employee Safety Podcast from AlertMedia, where you'll hear advice from experienced safety leaders on how to protect your people and business. I'm Peter Steinfeld. Today, I'm talking with Sara Pratley, the Senior Vice President of Global Intelligence at AlertMedia. She's been on the show several times before, both as a guest and a host. I invited her back today to provide us with insights on what businesses can expect before, during, and after the 2024 U.S. presidential election on November 5th. Sara spent countless hours briefing AlertMedia's customers and partners on how to prepare their people and organizations for what's to come, and you won't want to miss her tips for mitigating the associated risks. Here's our conversation. Hey, Sara, welcome back to the show. I appreciate you joining me in the studio.
Hey, Peter. So excited to be here to talk about such an important topic.
Yeah, it is indeed. And I'm just going to jump right into it because there's a lot to cover. With Election Day approaching quickly here in the U.S., what are some of the key dates that we should be aware of for the election itself, and then maybe the period that follows shortly thereafter?
There's so many things. We've already passed a lot of key moments. We've had the RNC, we've had the DNC, we've had some presidential debates. We don't think there's any more of those coming up at this point, but we do have a ton more campaign activity. As we obviously draw closer to the election, we're going to see a lot of that, not only from the presidential candidates, but of course from the vice presidential candidates as well. So we've got a lot of buildup towards the general election day, November 5th, but of course the days and the weeks following that will be important for folks to pay attention to as well. As we continue to get past Election Day, we'll of course have January 6th, a day that rings true in everybody's memory. That's the day that we'll see the election votes certified and the election itself certified in DC. And then of course, January 20th, we'll see the inauguration. So many things my team and I know everyone else is paying attention to as we really get towards the election.
Well, as this time passes, what are some of the things businesses should be mindful of or perhaps prepare for in the lead up to Election Day?
There's probably three things that are most top of mind right now or should be for business leaders. There's the heightened security. We've seen 2 assassination attempts on the former president. We've seen both presidential campaigns with elevated security around their events, both the presidential candidates and the vice presidential candidates. We've, of course, also seen in recent weeks poll workers and election sites that have received threats. We've had at least a few dozen in recent weeks, some of those causing evacuations. We've also got a third of campaign and election workers who have said that they've experienced some sort of harassment or threat as well. So there's definitely that heightened sense of security, not only around the candidates, but as I mentioned, poll workers and poll locations. There's really that heightened sense of security around a lot of locations across the entirety of the country. Beyond that, demonstration activity, my team pays really close attention when it comes to demonstrations. We've seen a significant increase, not just due to the election right now, but just in recent years as well, people who are protesting not only around the candidates, but of course around different issues too. So we're expecting to see a pretty significant increase, not only around election sites and around the campaign events, but also just around different locations based on different topics. And then I think just the third one that I would mention is general business continuity disruptions, right? I'm sure if you're in any one of the cities that has had one of the major events like the RNC or the DNC, there's the major traffic disruptions too. So a lot of that are things that I think businesses should just keep in mind as we draw closer to Election Day.
So it's not just contained to like Washington, D.C. It's literally everywhere in the country. It could be anywhere. So as people try to think about this, what are the main locations that experience increased negative activity and how can businesses prepare for this?
The ones that immediately come to mind are campaign events themselves. Former President Trump, Vice President Harris, either one of them having any sort of event just top of mind for people. In addition, we think about campaign offices. Each party has a number of offices and locations throughout the country. When we think about election night in general, those are obviously the main locations and events. There's a lot of other locations though, right? Think about a country with tens of thousands of polling locations, additional locations on top of that where votes will be tabulated and counted. When we think even about watch parties where people might gather to watch the votes come in, these are all locations that business continuity, safety and security leaders, and just employees in general should be taking into consideration as key locations. Another question you asked in there was really about business continuity, right? How do we as business leaders, safety and security leaders prepare for events like these? I would say there's a number of different things that folks should be keeping in mind. One would just be understanding, knowing what the events are, knowing what the locations are. If you can understand that there's a campaign event that's near you, or there are a number of polling locations that are near some of your offices, That's going to empower you to understand that there may be different activity. I think some other things that people can consider is their workforce, the way they operate and the way they work. Are there different things that they can do? If you're a traditional office, can you have people work remotely on election day, or if there's campaign events going on around your location on a certain date and time? I know a lot of companies that are thinking about that. If you can't, maybe you're a retail location and you want to run business as usual that day, just taking into consideration and maybe informing employees, thinking about physical security, understanding if there might be demonstration activity. Those are all questions that are really good to ask ahead of time so that you and your employees can be prepared.
With so much at stake with this particular election, what are some of the potential outcomes we might see?
There's potentially three outcomes. The former president, Donald Trump, wins and he takes back the White House. VP Kamala Harris, she could potentially win and she could take the White House. Or probably much more realistically, we see a repeat of 2020 and there's no way to call a winner on election night because the vote potentially will take a very long time to tabulate. When you look at a state like Georgia that's going to have to hand count all ballots on election day, that's obviously a contributing factor. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, neither of those states can actually open up mail-in ballots until election day itself. North Carolina actually can't open the early ballots until the polls close that night. So when we think about all of these factors and when we think about what's at stake and just the closeness of the election, when we think about the polls right now, there is a pretty substantial chance that we're not actually going to see a candidate called on election night and that this is something we'll be watching in the days subsequent to this. We think about potential impacts across the country, right? There's that uncertainty and just folks waiting with bated breath. Who's the next president of our country going to be? That's obviously an impact that we'll see. And then there is the potential for demonstration activity dependent upon each candidate, but also dependent on issues. Women's rights are things that people are very passionate about on both ends of the spectrum. When it comes to abortion in particular, we could see demonstration activity around a number of different events. Those are the things that me and my team will be keeping the closest eye on. And I think that's the thing that business continuity and security leaders will be keeping a really close eye on as well.
How concerned should businesses be about potential election-related disruptions to their local communities?
I would say there should always be a level of concern, mostly because I think that drives us into the force of preparedness, right? If we express some concern and we're wrapping our heads around some potential impacts, whether they're physical and tangible, whether they're things that could potentially happen in and around office locations, those are the things that are going to drive us to have those thought-provoking conversations. Are we prepared potentially for demonstrations to break out in certain areas? Are we prepared for a workplace where there may be personnel disputes? Are we prepared for different ramifications post-election, not only right after the election, but really in the weeks and months after as well, as we think about different issues that are happening globally and how each candidate potentially thinks about those as well.
With that in mind, given all the potential risks that your team is seeing out there, how can businesses really effectively mitigate some of those risks that are associated with things like demonstrations and civil unrest?
Knowing ahead of time is really great. A lot of the work that my team does is on kinetic activity, things that are happening in the moment right now, right? The booms, bangs, and pops. When we think about demonstration activity, we generally have a bit of a curve there. More often than not, we can predict some of this because many groups that plan demonstrations plan. They put them out ahead of time. We know that there might be people that are gathering in certain locations and where, sometimes even how many, or if there's going to be counter demonstrations. So I think in this case, knowledge is power. Being able to understand and identify those ahead of time and really even understanding whether they're near your facilities or your assets or your employees, that becomes paramount and is really a great thing in these situations when you can have a little bit of advance notice. I think also remembering that it's not just a national election day, there could be disruptions around local elections too. So I think just having that more full scope is going to help people think about election day in a bigger, broader picture. And then I think just expecting peace, because in most situations, we do have very peaceful outcomes. People demonstrate, they want to hear their voices, they want to stand behind a certain platform, a candidate, an issue. Sometimes things do turn violent. So I think preparing for that violence, even though we're expecting things to be peaceful, right? And again, drive some of those conversations that can really help with preparedness.
You mentioned the local aspect, which made me think about the global aspect as well. So are there any geopolitical risks associated with the potential outcome of this particular election? And what should businesses know about that?
There are so many geopolitical events happening that have those reverberating impacts. As I think about the cascade effect, something we talk about a lot with a lot of the businesses that we support, the fact that an event can happen or an event can be happening over time that has localized impacts, regional impacts, and then even global impacts. We have a war between Ukraine and Russia that has been going on for a few years now. We've got a conflict in the Middle East, plenty of other things going on in the world around us that have those reverberating and kind of domino effects, whether it's supply chain, whether it's security. And when we think about the ties to the election, we of course have candidates who have different positions on things that are happening around the globe. And depending on who takes the White House, those could play out over time as well. I think very acutely to what's happening in the Middle East and the impacts that we're seeing right now globally. In the United States, as well as around the rest of the world, we have seen mass demonstration campaigns. It's been almost a year and we continue to see a lot of demonstration activity. And I would expect, based on whoever takes the White House, in both situations, we could continue to see demonstration activity around these events as well. And I know I keep honing in on demonstration activity, but it is the one tangible thing that we're continuing to see related to a lot of these events that I believe that business leaders can really prepare for.
What about election security and foreign interference? Those were pretty major concerns in previous elections. So how significant are those issues going to be this year?
It's certainly something that we're hearing from federal officials and authorities, and we've been hearing this for more than a year now. I'm going to read you a quote at this point because I think it's really important. This is from the Homeland Threat Assessment. This is something that is published early on each year that's really focused on things that could potentially impact the United States. Nation-state adversaries intent on undermining our social cohesion are incorporating new technologies into their mis, dis, and malinformation campaigns, which will likely ramp up ahead of the election this year. Absolutely 100% expected, and this is what we're seeing. We've seen in recent weeks and recent months the attacks that were attributed to Iran, attacking not only one campaign, but both campaigns. This has been all over the headlines, so certainly something that has come to fruition. We've also seen concerns over not only Iran, but Russia and China meddling and interacting with the election as we think about technology, the advancements in artificial intelligence, the ability to create content using artificial intelligence, as well as the ability to propagate information really quickly across a number of platforms and really that spread of that mis and disinformation. One of the things I'll also point out is the FBI and CISA, they put out a joint alert over the summer specific to DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks. They were really calling out that this is something that, of course, is concerning, but also wanted to really spread factual information about what this means. There's a lot when it comes to election security in the United States. There's a lot that goes into the local and the national level. I was actually able to sit in on a speaker in Ohio talking about the process there. It's just amazing to think about the great lengths that people go when it comes to election security with the vote. But with these DDoS attacks, they could have a negative impact on our impressions about the vote. I may get online on election day. I may be looking on one of the localized websites trying to figure out, where's my polling location? I want to go after work. If there's some sort of attack on that website and it deters me from being able to find my location right, that could have a negative impact, not only on my ability to go and find my location, which I should probably know ahead of time, but also my perception of election security. So this alert that they put out obviously is very informative about the process. And I think it's important. Obviously, local and national and federal officials are trying to get out some really important information ahead of the election, just drawing attention to these things.
What about internal issues? What should companies anticipate or perhaps prepare for when it comes to their employees?
Tensions are high. Opinions are very strong when we think about politics in general, especially as we think about this election and the campaign cycle. People are very passionate about their beliefs. And I think that's a good thing, right? But we also have to recognize that when people have very passionate opinions, we also get people who maybe disagree, sometimes in respectful manners, sometimes not. I'm happy to hear that organizations are really taking these things into consideration, not only around the election, but just events in general that can really lead to heightened tensions and conversations in the work environment.
Well, as we wrap up here, do you have any final words of advice for our listeners as they reflect on everything that we discussed today?
Knowledge is power. Understanding the events that are happening around you and your facilities and your locations, really informing yourself and your employee population. I think that's the best thing for organizations ahead of the election, on election day, and honestly in the weeks and months after as we see continued activity, especially when we think about demonstrations.
Well, this is a really important topic, and I appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Always a pleasure.
To learn more about Sara and her work at AlertMedia, click on the links in the show notes. For video highlights from today's episode, just search for AlertMedia on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. Stay safe out there.
Thank you for listening to the Employee Safety Podcast from AlertMedia, the industry's most intuitive emergency communication and threat intelligence solution. To learn more about how to protect your people and business during critical events, visit alertmedia.com. Until next time.